Welcome to Reaction and to our weekly show, The Press Review, where our esteemed contributors, my colleagues Mark Fox and Alastair, Benn, and myself talk you through some of the pieces that we've seen during the week that we think you should read or that have been caught our eye. Now, obviously, the news today is dominated by the new variant, Mark, and you've chosen a story this morning from the FT, which looks at what is happening and also the impact it's already having on the markets.
Well, I think this is it's interesting because, of course, the FT story has already been outpaced by the press conference, the statement that that the health secretary had today. But I think, you know, when we have debated and discussed the impact of the virus over the last 18 months, 2 years, understandably, it's been about people. Our concern has been about people, how we should live, how we should respond, the different age groups, and being very human, as it should be. But the truth is, this is an ongoing situation that has to be managed and is having the most profound economic impact, you know, on stock markets and on the way we earn our living and how we earn our livings, and on accentuating business and enterprise problems and challenges. And this latest version, which is very early days, but obviously the government's responded very promptly and in a very timely way. You know, I hope that we will not get wearily dragged back into the completely waste of time arguments about, you know, is it fair to the young and the old and the middle-aged and masks and social distancing. This is a serious issue that has to be managed, and we need to be practical and pragmatic about it. There are huge implications for how we run not just society but our economy, and it's one of those very practical issues. You know, our beloved and esteemed editor is himself man down at the moment, having got the virus, right? And we wish him, which will be of interest to all our readers and fans here at Reaction. We wish him and his family, you know, speedy return to health. But it's a good case in point, right? He's not able to be with us today to come and do this debate because he's having a cough. And I think
we should add, Mark, and double vaccinated. So.
And double back and take all sensible precautions. So this is a practical issue, as far as I'm concerned, which the FT story highlights the impact on markets and on business. And that if we're going to go through waves of this, as we obviously are, we need to think about this in a very practical way.
Mark, there have already been a few criticisms that they've acted too hastily, stopping flights from South Africa. But do you think this is the case, damned if you do and damned if you don't? And we remember the criticism when they didn't earlier in the spring, in March, close down routes from India, where the Delta variant was, you know, taking off.
Well, I think this is true. Politically speaking, you know, we can all have views about whether we think they've acted too speedily or whether they haven't. I mean, they've done this for the next couple of days till they get the isolation, you know, infrastructure sorted out. Although, frankly, I'm a bit surprised that we don't already have this at our fingertips after all this time, actually. So I was a bit surprised to find out that we needed to buy ourselves 2 or 3 days till we could go and book rooms and all of that. So I don't criticize the government for moving too fast, trying not to criticize the government when it moves too slowly. They're all good, but what is good to see is that they're on the ball. I mean, I think the key thing, as far as I can see from this new variant, is that we simply don't know yet, you know, and let's hope and pray that it is, whether it is constrained by getting your jabs. Let's hope that it is, because if it's constrained by getting the jabs, then that's one thing. If it God forbid that it turns out that it isn't for any reason, then, you know, we're facing the rather bleak prospect of being exactly where we started 2 years ago. And that's just completely, you know.
Let's not even think about that, Mark.
Yeah.
Very unlikely. Now, Alastair, you've been reading up a little bit on what we know so far and what the WHO is doing in their research, because they're looking at the new variant, aren't they, and trying to establish whether indeed, as Mark says, their vaccine, whether the current vaccines are efficient. What is it you've been able to, and what's your reaction to the latest move?
I think there's some inadequacies in the data at the moment in terms of what we know, because unfortunately the way the virus is the way it interacts with the PCR tests that we use, it's only been appearing. It has a specific. It kind of needs a specific PCR test to identify it. So you've seen cases go up very rapidly in Gauteng province in South Africa, but from a base of almost zero, and have gone up hugely in the last week. But obviously that's a kind of an artifact of the fact that they're testing properly for it. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty, I think, about precisely its fitness as a virus. Is it going to displace Delta? It's a key question, because we have loads of Delta variant washing around. I mean, 100% likely that Ian is ill with the Delta variants, as lots of people are ill with it at the moment across Europe. So will it outcompete the Delta variant? That's a key question to which there is not a good answer at the moment. I'd like to, it's not a piece that I'm bringing to the review, but I'd like to identify a Twitter thread by Tulio Oliveira, who is let me just get his, Tulio de Oliveira, who's the director of the Centre for Epidemic Response and Innovation in South Africa. And he's one of the scientists who's responsible for sequencing and the virus and then publishing on it. And he and his team deserve a lot of credit in terms of moving quickly on this and alerting people of what's going on, given how important transparency is at the moment in terms of identifying kind of new strains or new variants or whatever. I do think, however, that there are things we can talk about in terms of the response, because in terms of the kind of broader politics of it, because it's not just the way we think of variants. It does fall along kind of semi-ideological lines. The people who have been probably more stringent restrictions tend to really jump on it and say, this is almost like a new pandemic, which justifies a kind of a new playbook. And you see this morning, I saw a tweet from a reporter at the FT who said big red klaxon tweets and a red klaxon emoji, and 2 flights have just come in from Johannesburg into Heathrow. And it's like, what purpose does that kind of reporting serve to the public? Of course, there are going to be 2 flights coming in from Johannesburg this morning to Heathrow, given that this variant has only just been identified and sequenced in a matter of days.
Alastair, I'm going to tease you, Alastair, right? As you are, I'm an old retired journalist and you're an up-thrusting journalist, right? And the answer to your question there is because it's news. That's why. And that gets your name. And how do we know that that's worked? Because you are now talking about this guy's Twitter thread. So I would say to you, 1-0 to the FT journalist and his red klaxon.
But what we can add to that is, and it's very important, that other journalists put it into context, and that each virus will probably have about 3,500 variants. So there is, but Mark, you must admit, there is a sort of sense that people, and a lot in the mainstream media, love latching onto these new things. They want another lockdown,
Hold on, Mrs. I write for the Daily Mail. What's all this? What's all this? Of course we do context and balance and good analysis at Reaction, and that's why we love it, and that's why we're here, and that's why people read it. But Maggie, we're not so grand as not to know a good old headline when we see it. So we mustn't get too holier than thou.
Okay. On that note, we will move to another glaring headline that you've brought to our attention, Mark. And that is that the Smithsonian Library is underwater because of climate change. Now,
I think this just cracked me up, right? The Smithsonian, the repository of all that is best and worst in American history, is itself sinking, like arguably the great, country itself. And climate, right in the heart of the capital, where there are so many climate skeptics and they struggle with addressing these issues. And this poor old museum that is a wonderful visit, I'm sure we've all been there, just fantastic, is literally got people pumping out water from the basement, it's like a sinking ship.
But what is the basis that it is climate change? Is it perhaps built near a river? And
because the Wall Street Journal is New York Times, beg your pardon, is a newspaper beloved, of course, by the editor
Indeed.
of Reaction.
He used to work
The
there.
New York Times is reporting that the water tables are rising and that flooding is happening. And of course, Washington, as we know, is basically all built on a big malarial swamp anyway, right? So even at the best of times, it's a pretty unhealthy place to be, but the water is rising and so on.
Are they going to move it? Are they going to move it?
No, I think they're just going to get better pumps and insulate the basement. But it was just the image of the sort of nature rising up.
I love it. I love it. So, Alastair, tell us your, you picked out a rather good story on young male novelists. A lot of people have been decrying or been very upset because there aren't enough of them that you have discovered.
Yeah, it's a long read in Dazed entitled "Where Have All the Young Male Novelists Gone?" And the author is
a young male novelist
called.
Yes.
Well, no, he seems to be a critic.
Okay.
Oh, I think Barry Pierce. He's a young critic. And he's just saying it's a really good long read and kind of puts there's been a bit of a debate recently over, spurred by various kind of shortlists and over the last few months, in which there are, very few to zero sort of male novelists below, a sort of certain age. And there's sort of spurned a bit of a debate, definitely online, about, what is this something? Is it just sort of tiny violins in the world about there not being many male novelists nowadays, given that 95% of Western, especially of Western literature, for example, is written by men, and
95%. Wow.
Well, in terms of the sheer words that have survived, if you think about all the thousands of words that are written in the classical period, that you could probably put in a couple of books the number that survived that are written by women. So that women are writing novels, are getting paid properly to write novels, and are able to do it not under a pseudonym, is something that is a profoundly important and a fantastic development over the last century and a half. But so there's that side of the argument. But then it is interesting, just on a kind of sort of disinterested level, that there is no kind of, as you said, Mark, there's no young thrusting generation of young male novelists at the moment. And that has been for the last 50 years, there's always been a sort of new kids on the block, whether that was, Amos or Barnes back in the day or whoever. And I think it's great that our literary culture is not just dominated by people like Martin Amos and Julian Barnes.
Absolutely.
It would be horrible to go back to that. But
is there an explanation?
It is interesting. Well, novels are really, they don't seem to, men dominate non-fiction in terms of the sheer percentage of non-fiction books that get published every year in the UK. There is a large majority written by men, so that maybe they're drawn into it because it's more lucrative or a surer bet in terms of of getting published or of getting acclaim. But then there's a kind of more sophisticated take, which is that men are not reading novels as much as they were, and there's always been an imbalance in the 20th century. Women always read more novels than men throughout the whole of the 20th century, but now that balance has tipped even more in favor of women, and men just don't seem to be drawn to novels or in that kind of. But then if you're maybe people are not interested in the young male view in the way that they are interested in like the young female view, like Sally Rooney, or there's lots of great examples of young female novelists who are doing brilliant work. But it's like, is this a problem? Is this, is it, as in a clumsy way raised by an MP yesterday about male role models? Is it a problem that women are being cast in maybe traditional male roles, and they don't feel like they have role models in the media anymore. I don't think that's really true. But I'm just, it just seems an interesting debate. I don't really have a particularly strong opinion, but it's a very good piece. So well done, Barry Pearce. Yeah, please go and read it.
Good. Well, I've chosen an article from the Daily Telegraph by Fraser Nelson, which you, Mark, in particular, are going to absolutely love. It's not quite a regret or a mea culpa, but he does say, as a Europhile, he voted for Brexit. And he doesn't say that he wishes he hadn't, but what he points out is that we're not taking the advantages that he thought we could as, I hate this expression, but global Britain. We've always been global Britain. And he pointed to a speech, which I also wrote about this week, by Lord Frost, our Mr. Brexit minister, who pointed out that we really, if we slip back into the European social model for our economy, then we've really thrown away Brexit, and that we must take advantage through lower taxes, better regulation, some lower. And it was an interesting piece, because I think there are an awful lot of people who are perhaps thinking rather like Fraser, that this government doesn't seem to be taking those advantages that it could. What's your? I loved that he had one wonderful expression. He said Liz Truss's trade agreements by Instagram, and as he pointed out, she's done incredibly well, but actually they were just the old EU agreements which have been rewritten, if you like. Do you think we're missing those opportunities, Mark?
Well, I don't think we ever sensibly thought about what these opportunities were before we started down this road, actually. And to make a success of being a country standing on its own outside of any big trade bloc requires a massive restructuring of the economy, of the labour market, and of how we approach civil society. And I see absolutely no politician anywhere that is willing to get up and make that speech, and never has done either. So, I've always been, I'm perfectly content to be inside the European Union, and I'm perfectly content to be outside of it. If we were starting from scratch, I wouldn't be saying join it. I probably wouldn't have been saying let's go to all the effort of leaving it. And I'm perfectly content that we should be outside the European Union. But I'm afraid that I do think that there's been a lot of sort of wish fulfillment and complete sort of misunderstanding about what is needed to be done. Alastair didn't, but Maggie, you and I grew up, in the 1970s. We all perfectly remember what inflation and stagnating productivity and all of that, right? And it wasn't much fun then, and it's not much fun now. Once inflation, as it is going to, in my view, get a good grip, productivity hasn't increased. We don't see any politician or political party seriously suggesting the reforms that we need to do. We seem to be got it into our heads that we can go on borrowing and spending and borrowing and spending. I mean, it is an old and tested and very successful recipe for economic stagnation and for economic failure. So Lord Frost is right to say we need to get a grip on this if we're going to pursue this, right? We've got to get a grip on it, and we've got to face up to what it means. Now, I would simply say, I don't notice that Britain, during its time of membership of the European Union, had any trouble getting to grip with these things under Mrs. Thatcher and all the rest of it. I don't notice that Germany is economically strangled by its social model or its membership of the European Union, but let's assume that Mrs. Thatcher and Germany are two bad examples of the untold golden lands that await us. But I am waiting for somebody somewhere to come and say, this is what we need to do. And Fraser is right to identify that we're now leaving it pretty late.
Oh, and we need some very pragmatic and quite easy to do, actually. It doesn't necessarily have to be low taxes, but certainly for industry, and particularly with Boris's so-called levelling up, you could have enterprise zones.
Well, to be fair, under the last Labour government, under Gordon Brown, right, they transferred billions of pounds from the south to the northwest and the northeast, right? Billions of pounds. Simply transferring money to schemes and projects is not the answer. You've got to have regional tax variation. I think we've got to encourage people to go and set up businesses, to create jobs, right? To invest in the local infrastructure at local levels. You've got to create regional dynamic economies. And so we should be looking much more at all of that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. So now we're going to switch to the internet. Alastair,
is Alastair not allowed to express a Brexit view?
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, Alastair. Yeah, please.
I don't want him to miss out on all the fun. He's the young person here.
Yes. And you were a staunch Remainer, Mr. Benn?
I was. I voted to remain. I would gutted when we voted to leave. I think it was very funny when I was in the British Library, and the day before the votes, it was everyone was walking around with these big badges. I'm voting in. It was a great atmosphere. And then the day afterwards, I went in, and it was one of the most hot. It was like walking into it was worse than walking into like a wake or a funeral or something. It was just people, angry phone calls in the lobby, and people just staring at their computers, like completely unable to work. And I remember being very struck by that. But yeah, I've kind of I've always had the view that it's kind of the good things about Brexit, which are that it sort of brings into the air. I think you'll agree with this, Mark. It sort of brings into the air a kind of series of democratic sort of wranglings and debates that we definitely need to have over the union, over the state of our institutions, over all kinds of aspects of British life and productivity and all that. And that's in the long run should be something that will look like a good decision in the long term. But in the medium term, there's so much capacity for us to mess it up. And if we don't have the right leadership at the helm of the ship of state, we are going to struggle in the kind of stormy waters that we're seeing at the moment, and we won't have the kind of we are isolated in Europe at the moment, and that's playing out in all kinds of kind of the aspects. Just you look at the over migrants and fishing. We're not on both sides of the channel not doing ourselves many favors in terms of how we're handling bilateral problems at the moment.
I mean, I would say, I know I'm conscious of time, Maggie, but I would say, of course, the historians among us would say, because we have a long and proud tradition in England on standing on the south coast, lobbing verbal brickbats at the continental Europe. It goes
invading Calais again, Mark.
Our traditional sort of traditional approach. But whether that leads to there's going to be a political price, and Alastair rightly identified. The migrant thing is one. I personally think that is a historic migration. It's going to need very careful handling, because I think stopping it altogether is very difficult. This great passage of people. But I think the political prices will be paid in the end if people see their standard of living, right, their employment prospects, their opportunities not growing and prospering in the way that they think that they should, and they have been used to over the last 25-30 years.
Absolutely. And on having said that, to both of you, the migrant crisis, of course, predates us coming out of the EU. Has nothing to do with it. And these people are ones who want to come to Britain. And it seems to me that what we need to do is clarify a method for genuine asylum seekers who either from persecution or economic migrancy can come in, but we have to stop the people smuggling. And actually, rather than go to your piece, Alastair, I'll go to the piece, a very good piece in The Guardian by Jon Henley, who's down at Calais, and he's been talking to a lot of the fishermen and the police who witness not just Wednesday's tragedy, but who are intimately involved with the smuggling process. And and I think a figure is the French have already caught about 1,400 gangs this year. But it seems to me this is what we have to stop, and we have to go right back to the source. Literally, I saw another UN figure this week that in the Med over the last year, 1,600 people have died. So as you said, Well, this is a historic migration. It's coming from the Middle East and from Africa, and it will continue, and it will get even greater. So we really do need to work with the EU, and it's tragic that Macron has said that Priti Patel cannot attend this meeting on Sunday. Hopefully behind the scenes they'll be working that out, and we'll be there.
Actually, what needs to happen is that the President of France and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom need to get together themselves, sit in a round of thing, and sort this thing out in as far as that can be sorted out and make some progress. They shouldn't be sending it off to subordinates one way or the other. And they shouldn't be waiting till Sunday. They should be getting on with it.
Well, Boris should have just jumped on a plane and gone yesterday.
Or Macron, or let's put an aircraft carrier in the middle of the channel if we're that touchy. And
meet in Jersey.
And they can, or whatever, you know, they can meet on a cruise liner in the middle of the channel. But
bad leadership. And they would have done both there. Both countries would. And Macron's got an election next year. Yeah, absolutely.
They could meet on the great Isle of Wight, Maggie.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
They should be put onto the Dover to Calais ferry for as long as it takes, because that place is the closest approximation to hell on earth.
Ever.
And they have to eat those horrible fried breakfast, those like fried breakfasts things. They just have to eat them over and over again.
Alastair, you're so woke. You're so woke. Lovely Dover to Calais ferry fried breakfast. Lovely.
Ghastly.
It's so
no, absolutely.
No, it's just bad memories.
What do you want, Alastair? Sort of vegetarian bap and a sort of
mozzarella panini.
I don't mind a full English. It's just the peculiar collision of slot machines, choppy waters, and and a pretty dull atmosphere that make the Dover to Calais ferry pretty unpleasant.
My memories of Dover Calais ferries are people throwing up cherries, because I think in Calais they had a huge bumper harvest, so everybody ate cherries. It was not a good, pleasant sight. So on that note, Alastair, your final piece that you've chosen today.
Just saying that on the Dover to Calais ferry, perhaps it's what's the word? Talking about the conditions on the ferry compared to the migrant crossings is kind of frivolous because of what's happened. But so my piece in is by James Marriott at the Times, who's wrote a really nice piece on forgetting and the internet, and it was his column this week, and it's sort of saying, the kind of eternal presence that the internet gives us kind of means that the power of forgetting, which is a kind of really intrinsic feature of how we manage our mental health or how we manage kind of collective life, is forgotten. So we don't have those mechanisms available to us that maybe previous societies did, in terms of sort of saying that stuff's in the past, we can forgive and forget, because everything is downloaded and put onto a server in Palo Alto and is accessible theoretically for as long as those servers have a reality. And I thought it was a really good piece, and definitely gets to the heart of something that is sort of intrinsically terrifying. It's like that Nietzsche's eternal return, the idea that you just have to live your life over and over again, which is not. I'm just paraphrasing it, and that's probably not sophisticated enough. But it's just like that, that on a kind of immediate level, that sounds terrifying. But then I've been reading a book recently called The Search, which was a very celebrated sort of short history of the sort of early history of search engines by John Battle, who founded the technology magazine Wired. And he worked at Google, and it's a brilliant book, came out in 2004, 2005. And it just dramatizes so well the personalities and the culture that produced the World Wide Web. And, we went from kind of the tech being located in individual computers and certain, indexes controlled by small groups, into this extraordinary sort of this map of everything, really, with all the nodes connected together. And many things that is maybe reflect on too, we are building a new Library of Alexandria, and it is a database of intentions, as John Battle calls it. And that is, for all its, that is going to reflect some of the worst of humanity and the evil that we do. But it's not a project that we shouldn't be involved in. It's a very human thing to do. And it's what, human societies have done for centuries and centuries, is people have got together and tried to build enormous indexes of life and everything, and that is kind of beautiful. And for all the kind of techno-pessimism that's around at the moment, when people write the history of the 21st century, they will identify Sergey Brin, Page, who were working in some, in Stanford and in elite American universities, total visionary characters who took huge personal risks in terms of how companies would treat them, and created these devices, which are, we went from 400 million searches a day in 2004 to what, over 8 billion searches a day today. And that's only going to get bigger and bigger.
I'm going to take
and that
a
to
vote.
me is, anyway,
We're running out of time.
I think we should not be so pessimistic.
Okay, I'm going to take a vote. If we could, would you go back and uninvent the internet?
Damn right.
Yeah, me too. And Alan, it's going to be 2-1, isn't it?
But then would you also uninvent all the things that it allows us to do?
We'd find other ways to do those. And we already had. We told stories, we wrote.
We already did, we somehow managed to pay our bills and find our way around and read, and we managed to do all these things. We actually used to speak to each other face to face, Alastair. That was an old-fashioned thing that we used to do.
So
we used to, post
just
letters.
like we are now.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And we used to live, Alastair, most importantly, in the real world, not in some alternative lunatic universe.
Metaverse.
Real
On that note,
it's the real world. It's servers in America.
And hopefully they'll be flooded by climate change in a few years' time, like the Smithsonian.
Fingers. And we'll run out of what's that horrible stuff we keep digging out of the ground?
Cobalt.
Whatever it is, what we need is one big power cut.
Yeah, and there's young children in the Congo mining it. Horrendous. Mark,
that's Alistair's world.
You're gonna lead us out now with trumpets, because we have some good news and we're running out of time. Your final story, the Queen.
Well, and the best thing is that it's reported, right, in all the best media, Alastair, you'll be pleased to know, like, Royalty Weekly and Majesty Monthly, right, is that the Queen has let it be known that she is better and that she's back in charge. And that, frankly, will warm the heart of all sensible reaction readers and all sensible subjects everywhere.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much. And she's going to be there for Christmas. I think that was her main message.
She summoned the family to Sandringham for Christmas.
Right. Final Christmas. Well, if you liked what you saw, you can visit our website, www.reaction.life, or you can like here and subscribe to us. And thank you very much to both my esteemed colleagues. It's great fun.
Lovely to see you both.
See you soon. Bye.